Hey guys, what's going on? Laying back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about White Noise. White Noise is an American comedy drama based on the novel of the same name, and centers around a blended family living in a typical American suburb whose life is upended by a series of unfortunate events. They find themselves grappling with the stresses of their ongoing work, followed by an airborne toxic event that exacerbates their feelings. As the family proceeds with daily life and mundane conflicts associated with it, they also explore several mysteries surrounding their very existence, such as the balance between life and death, and the possibility of finding happiness in a world filled with uncertainty. This was the best summary I could think of for this movie, and to be honest, I'm still not sure what to make of it. It is without a doubt the weirdest movie I have ever seen on Netflix, and it's not necessarily that it's bad. There are definitely good and interesting things about it, but all of these things are presented so strangely and messily that it never amounts to a cohesive whole. As always, I find it best to begin by talking about the characters, starting with Jack Gladney, who's played by Adam Driver. Out of all the characters in the movie, he's the most comprehensible, or the least weird, depending how you interpret it. Either way, he's a compelling protagonist for the story, simply due to the fact that he feels the most fleshed out of all of them and has goals that he pursues. He does his best to provide for his family while struggling to learn German for an upcoming speech related to his career as a Hitler studies professor. The unusual context behind this trait alone was enough to catch my attention, and Jack became more interesting once his fear of death was explored. Between his self-belief of the pointlessness of his career and what happens to him later on in the movie, Jack has to confront his fear of death head-on, and is only kept afloat on account of worrying for his wife and family, and Driver does a fantastic job in communicating his character's struggles in a subtle but effective way. The only other notable character that comes to my mind is Jack's wife Babette, who's played by Greta Gerwig. Like with Jack, she also battles with the fear of death, but in a much different way than Jack does, instead running away from it and trying to forget about it. Her fear of death feels more emotive compared to that of Jack's, and this is reflected in her character as she experiences emotional episodes and tries to numb her feelings. It's interesting to see how the two compare and contrast with each other, and because the relationship fluctuates with the film's events, their story becomes more intriguing as a result. The rest of the characters didn't really do anything for me. They weren't really bad, but they weren't great either. It felt like almost all of them were the exact same character, as everyone seems to behave and talk identically to each other. So apart from Don Cheadle's role as the Elvis-obsessed Murray, I couldn't latch on to anyone. And I suppose with this being based on a book that there is a point to everyone behaving so similar to each other. The best guess I could make is that it shows how affected everyone in society is by the topics that are covered in the movie, and this creates a sense of monotony that's in keeping with the themes of the story. However, this same monotony brings a number of issues forward that make the movie more difficult for me to watch. The first problem becomes evident almost immediately with the dialogue, and this actually ended up being my biggest gripe I had with the movie. None of the characters ever talk like normal human beings. They always talk about random topics that never connect with what's supposed to happen in the story. Characters prattle on about things like how sugar-free gum gives cancer, an Elvis Presley power base, whatever that is, and there's even an entire beat dedicated to talking about Babette's hair and how pretty it is. And the entire time I was just like, what? And it's not just the fact that the dialogue is so weird, but that it constantly shifts focus from one weird topic to another. The movie constantly assaults the audience with idioms, sayings, and other useless jargon that make it incredibly difficult to understand just what is supposed to be accomplished. This would be fine to a certain extent if the movie took time for the characters to breathe, but for most of the first two acts, they just keep talking. The first scene alone, where Jack and his family are having breakfast together, is stuffed with so much rapid-fire dialogue that I had to pause and take a break just to process everything. My only guess as to why the movie is structured like this is so that it shows how people are constantly bombarded with messages from media and society and how it all adds up to a pile of noise. That makes sense, but it still doesn't excuse how annoying and unnatural its presentation is. My second problem came with how the movie took advantage of its setting, and to be fair, I actually did like what it was going for. It takes full advantage of its 1980s visual aesthetic, with everything from clothes to hairstyles to cars looking authentic, and Danny Elfman's soundtrack has a nostalgic vibe to it that is perfect. The amount of product placement is also something that I enjoyed, because it ties into the way people in society are affected by media and consumerism. Logos for products like Shell, Pepsi, and Pringles, among many others, are scattered everywhere, but they don't jump out at you. It just felt more subtle in communicating the influence of media and consumerism as opposed to characters talking so much. This being said, the story that takes place in this setting doesn't make any sense. The three acts feel like completely different movies when looked at separately, almost to the point where it feels like an anthology, yet it involves the same characters, so there's this huge awkward mishmash of stories and genre elements that never add up. The first act follows the academic life of Jack and how the subject of academia itself can be problematic, the second follows the airborne toxic event and how people create their own disasters, and the third follows the need for escaping the mundane nature of everyday life. All of these plots are fine individually, but when put together, it's a mess. The only time it felt like there was any consistent narrative was when the airborne toxic event took place, which coincidentally was my favorite part. It felt like a comedy of errors with how well prepared the family was for the disaster, the silly dialogue is kept to a minimum, and it actually felt like there was some progression and character development happening in terms of Jack's struggle to reconcile with his mortality. Everything else before and after this part of the movie felt redundant for the sake of being redundant. The academia plot was pure absurdism, while the pill plot, as I like to call it, didn't feel like it had enough emotional build-up behind it to warrant the conclusion it had. Rather than try to dive into one or a few topics and do them well, it instead seems to cover just about every issue that's wrong with modern society and doesn't seem to approach them with any rhyme or reason. Again, maybe this is the point with how white noise permeates around us without us realizing it, but I just wasn't a fan of the movie's approach to being a jack of all trades and a master of none. And again, it's not like I don't appreciate what the movie is going for. I love how there's this surrealistic dystopian vibe where everyone subscribes to madness, paranoia, and conspiracies, but they don't necessarily fight against the government or do anything drastic, almost like they're being held back. I just enjoyed the type of mood the movie was trying to convey, although I don't think it did the best job with it. This is because the movie shifts tones many times throughout the story. One moment it's a comedy, and in the next it suddenly becomes serious, and then back again without any even flow. There's even a few moments that would fit right in with a psychological horror flick, which completely took me out of the movie. It definitely fits in with the definition of absurdism, with how characters can't make sense of their daily lives and try in vain to find meaning in it. And if that's the case, it's possible that the style this movie is going for just isn't my cup of tea. But even so, I still feel torn as to whether I liked it or disliked it. Some of the more absurd moments in the movie can be funny if just taken at face value. The opening scene where Murray is talking about how wonderful car crashes are is a perfect example of how the movie can be funny while still having a coherent point behind its humor. But I found that as the movie progressed, the increasing number of absurd scenarios and ridiculous dialogue made the movie less funny and more confusing. It goes back to what I said earlier about the movie having too much going on, which hurts its more positive aspects in the long run. In terms of pure aesthetics though, the movie is fantastic. Like I said earlier, the 1980s visual theme and soundtrack is spot on, and I appreciate the quality of the cinematography too. It's excellent with how it frames characters with the right amount of lighting to convey a certain mood, or how it tracks situations as they slowly devolve into chaos. There really is a lot of stuff going on in the movie, and it doesn't always work, but when it does, it's brilliant. For this reason, I find myself split as to what I ultimately think about it. There's a lot of gems to be found in it with its themes and humor, but one has to sift through a lot of weird narrative choices to get to them. Overall, White Noise is a peculiar dramedy that will go down as one of the strangest pieces of cinema Netflix has ever released. If you like watching movies that are anything but ordinary and want to see one explore its themes in an unconventional way, this one would be right up your alley. This was an interesting way for Netflix to cap off its year for 2022, though whether or not it paid off, I guess only time will tell. In the meantime, I'd like to thank you for watching any of my reviews this year, and look forward to my top 10 best and worst Netflix 2022 videos coming soon. What did you think about this movie? Do you think it succeeded or failed in how it presented itself, or do you find yourself in the middle of the road like me? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of White Noise. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Colombian drama, The Kings of the World. Bye bye!